Hello and welcome to ICANN Media. I'm your host, Rob Hislop. We are coming to you from Banff at the Petroleum Safety Conference. It's the 65th anniversary for this event. Lots of great speakers here. And the first one up at the PSC is Dr. Louis Francescutti. Sir, thank you very much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Rob.
Tell us a little bit about why you're here and I guess a bit about your experience when it comes to safety.
Well, I've had the opportunity of speaking in the past to this group, and it's a group of dedicated individuals that for a long time, 65 years, have been trying to raise awareness around safety issues in the workplace, but off the workplace as well. And they always put on an excellent show, and they've got great speakers lined up, and the attendees have got a lot of experience as well. So you combine those all together, and I always learn something when I come to these events.
But you're teaching today, and when it comes to your experience, I mean, you're a former, or do you still do emergency room? So tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I'm an emergency physician, and I'm a professor in the School of Public Health at the university, so I teach about injury and how injury should be viewed as a disease, and that this disease is totally predictable and preventable, and whether the injuries occur at work, at home, or at play, there's patterns to them. And so we can learn from previous events to predict and prevent future events. And the majority of injury deaths actually occur at the scene of the injury. So the prevention is the only treatment for those individuals that unfortunately have lost their lives.
Well, so often you hear the term accident, and I remember interviewing you years ago when I was in local media, and you explained to me that there are no accidents, and so I started calling them collisions. I started calling them other things when I was reporting on them, because accident doesn't make sense to me, and it doesn't make sense to you either as far as a sweeping term that's used too often.
That's right, and unfortunately society views these events as accidents, and with accidents comes the connotation that there's nothing you can do about it, when that's the furthest thing from the truth. We know why these injuries are occurring, whether it's at work, at home, or at play, or in travel. They have patterns to them. And so injuries are no different than cancer or heart disease. I mean, it's something that we know happens on a regular basis. We know it's the leading cause of death for Canadians under the age of 44. Motor vehicle injuries under 35 are the leading cause of death. And for kids between 0 and 19, injuries exceed all other childhood diseases combined. So it's an opportunity for the province and the country to save billions of dollars if they were to focus on the problem. Similarly to, and we mentioned, when we talk about the daffodil, people know it's cancer. When we talk about red ribbons, pink ribbons, we know we're talking about breast cancer. But injuries have no real home that pushes for more research and more public awareness. So it would be ideal for the province to step up and say, we want to make Alberta injury-free. I mean, we're rat-free. Why can't we be injury-free?
Well, it is interesting because it is something that's so easily preventable.
Well, maybe not easily, but it is preventable through either engineering changes, enforcement changes, education, or economic incentives or disincentives. So we know that other jurisdictions like Sweden and Australia have been able to make a real big difference, but it takes leadership, and unfortunately we just don't seem to have that leadership in this province. Yeah.
One of the terms you mentioned is accountability. That we have to have accountability when it comes to, I guess, our own safety and the safety of others.
Yeah, and accountability works for adults, but for kids, it's hard to hold kids accountable because kids are exploring their environment, for example. So if kids are not properly restrained in vehicles, then you can't really blame the kid, right? Companies that take this problem seriously get an immediate payback because their bottom line is improved at the end of the day. So organizations understand the importance to do this, but our provincial government, for some reason or another, has sort of neglected their responsibility in making this province safer.
Well, you mentioned companies, and of course that's what this conference is directed towards as well, in the oil industry and other service companies as well. When you mentioned that when you walk into a business or an industrial area, you can tell whether or not there's a strong safety culture. What sort of things jump out at you for a strong one and one that perhaps isn't as strong as it should be?
Yeah, well, the most obvious one is, what does the place look like? So, if it's a construction site, how are the materials set up? If it's a workshop, how clean is the environment? Are there any tripping hazards? Is it well lit? Does every piece of equipment have a place it's supposed to go? And then talking to management, getting their sense of commitment to it, but more importantly, talking to the workers. And you can talk to the workers and find out immediately whether it is an environment where they can, if they have concerns, bring the concerns to the attention of management, and they're listened to and acted upon as well. And then there's, other things that you can look at in terms of their training programs and policies and manuals and procedures. But probably the most important one is, what's their injury rate? In spite of doing all these things, sometimes companies still have terrible injury rates, and that's when they regroup and they keep doing it till they get it perfectly. So you can usually tell a place that's safe as opposed to a place that's not safe.
Are there some leading factors that lead to injuries on the workplace?
Fatigue is one of them, mental illness, substance abuse, and this thing we talked about, which is procedural intentional non-compliance, which is basically you have a certain way you're supposed to do something, but for whatever reason you choose not to do it. Whether you think you can do it better yourself or you've found a way to cut a corner. So it's these non-compliance events that eventually lead to injuries, because if you do them often enough, then what ends up happening, it becomes the new standard operating procedure. So that's, the trick is to understand what's going on in people's lives that distracts them so that they end up getting injured, because most injuries are a distraction.
You mentioned a term called drift. Perhaps you can explain that for our audience.
Yeah, drift is basically if a company says that to do a certain procedure, you have to do it one way. How many people actually don't do it that way at all, or partly do it that way? It's similar to when I write a prescription to a patient. A third of patients fill the prescription properly, a third don't fill it at all, and a third kind of fill it. So how many people at work know they should be doing a certain task a certain way, but sort of do it in a certain way and sort of not do it a certain way? So that's drift. So how many people are drifting away from how they're supposed to be doing it? Once you measure that, then you can start evaluating what has to change so that you can get them back on track.
Okay. You mentioned that you'd like to see government taking a leading role. Is industry doing enough to protect itself, or is industry policing itself not the best way to go about it?
Well, that's one part of it. You're going to need industry to be involved, but you also need the government to set clear direction to the ministries and to the departments. And that's never happened in this province. I've never heard a premier in this province highlight injury as a major problem and highlight it as something that could be changed so that we can save lives and, more importantly, save resources within a resource limited environment that we're in right now. So it takes leadership at a level of someone who's a leader. So if Rachel Notley's the CEO of Alberta Incorporated, then she should run Alberta Incorporated like companies that take safety very seriously. And whether she's getting bad advice, I don't know, but I don't see it in this province. And I've been doing it, like you mentioned, for a long time. So am I satisfied after 30 years of doing this that we're heading in the right direction? The answer would have to be an unequivocal no.
You mentioned a website that people can go to.
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about that.
We received a grant from government many years ago to try and solve part of the problem. And so mysafetysurvey, altogether.com, mysafetysurvey, lowercase, .com, is a way that Alberta workers can go and do a risk assessment survey and get an immediate scorecard on how they're likely to be injured or not injured. And then we ran out of funds, and then companies can go in and assess how their workers are performing so that they can develop a company plan as well. But, it was a fatality that led to this, creative sentence. And, judge asked the lawyer to contact us, and we put in a grant. And then the Alberta Construction Safety Association, and then Shell and Enbridge and Graham and Chemco and others came on board. And, it's in a lull right now because the economy is so bad. But, once we pick up more funds, we'll be able to continue with the project and give companies an opportunity to assess the likelihood that their workers are going to be injured.
If you had one thing for people to take away from watching this or taking in your seminar as well, what would that be?
Oh, it's very simple, that you're most likely to be injured when you least expect it. So probably today, either on my drive home or later on tonight. If you're doing some activity, or if somebody's going to go mountain climbing today or on a trail, or no matter what you're doing today, these injuries always occur when you least expect them to. And when I ask people in emergency, did you ever think this would happen to you? No, it was just a typical day. And these things usually happen on a typical day.
So I have to ask you one more question. And how do you protect yourself from something that happens on a typical day?
So what you have to do is a quick risk assessment. So I've got to drive back to Edmonton. Had a good sleep last night. Wasn't drinking. I'm well rested. I'm in no rush to get back. I've got a good vehicle, full tank of gas. I know my route. And I know what part of the trip is going to be the most dangerous, probably Highway 2. So follow the speed limit, keep my eyes open, and hopefully get home safe and sound.
Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
We've been chatting with Dr. Louis Francescutti here on ICANN Media.